La Prensa is a Nicaraguan newspaper with offices in the capital Managua. Its current daily circulation is placed at 42,000. Founded in 1926. In 1932 it was bought by Pedro Joaquin Chamorro Zelaya, who had become editor-in-chief. He promoted the Conservative Party of Nicaragua and became a voice of opposition to Juan Bautista Sacasa, for which the paper was censored. He continued to be critical of dictator Anastasio Somoza Garcia, who came to power in a coup d'état. Twice the newspaper suffered the destruction of its building in earthquakes. In 1931 and 1972, forces of Somoza attacked the newspaper's offices in 1953 and 1956, and its work was repeatedly censored. After Chamorro Zelaya died in 1952, his eldest son Pedro Joaquin Chamorro Cardinal succeeded him as editor-in-chief and a voice of opposition. He opposed the excesses of the Somoza regime and came into conflict for his criticism of the regime, including after 1956 when the son Luis Somoza Debayle succeeded his father. La Prensa was founded by Pedro Belli, Gavri Rivas and Enrique Belli on March 2, 1926. In 1930, Pedro Joaquin Chamorro Zelaya became editor-in-chief, and in 1932 he bought the paper with the intention of promoting the principles of the Conservative Party of Nicaragua, as well as publicizing historical studies of Nicaragua. In 1931 the office building that housed La Prensa was destroyed, for the first time out of many, in an earthquake that hit Managua. La Prensa suffered its first censorship in 1934 under the orders of Juan Bautista Sacasa, for being overly critical of the government. This began a long history of censorship under many different governments. In 1936 Anastasio Somoza Garcia, who came to power through a coup d'état, began his own censorship of the paper. Threats against La Prensa for their anti-Somochista stance became customary. In 1945, under the guise of national security, the government ordered La Prensa to completely shut down for an indefinite amount of time. In 1952, after the death of Pedro Joaquin Chamorro, his eldest son, Pedro Joaquin Chamorro Cardinal, became the new editor of La Prensa. He is credited with improving the newspaper's fortunes. Chamorro Cardinal also increased the anti-Somoza rhetoric of his editorials, placing La Prensa at greater risk from the Somoza regime. Somoza subsequently increased his pressure on the editors of La Prensa. On May 22, 1953, one of Somoza's cronies, General Andrés Murillo, sent Somochista mobs to assault the newspaper's new building in Managua. Chamorro Cardinal was arrested, sent to military court, imprisoned and allegedly tortured for several months before being released. In 1956, Anastasio Somoza Garcia was assassinated and his son Luis Somoza Debayle succeeded him to power. Like his father, Somoza Debayle had little tolerance for the strong criticism against his regime that was mounted by La Prensa, which claimed to have argued for responsible government, participatory democracy, and neoliberal economic policies. That year, La Prensa was again occupied by Somoza's forces, and Chamorro Cardinal was charged with aiding the conspirators who had killed Debayle's father. He was subsequently jailed and forced to publish condolences to the late dictator Somoza. La Prensa was henceforth subjected to prolonged censorship by the regime. In 1959, Chamorro Cardinal went to Havana, Cuba, to meet with the new revolutionary leader, Fidel Castro, in order to bargain a deal for arms and munitions. After prolonged negotiations, disagreements between the two men resulted in no deal being achieved. But, by May of that year, Chamorro had gathered enough capital and weapons to land 120 men, including himself, in the provinces of Boeco and Chontales, in an attempt to overthrow Somoza Debayle. The invasion failed, which was known as the so-called Guerrilla de Olama y Molejones, and Chamorro was captured. He was convicted and sentenced to several years in prison. In 1963, La Prensa was praised for launching a literacy campaign, a concept that was later adopted by the Salvadoran FSLN. With modest tools, La Prensa caused a nationwide sensation by publishing over 100,000 primers that were the backbone of the national literacy campaign. They circulated maps of Nicaragua to millions who had never had the opportunity to study one in school. The program was distributed by UNESCO to local teachers. Notably, future Sandinistas such as Ernesto Cardinal, Sergio Ramirez, Gioconda Belli Murillo, and Carlos Mejia Godoy all contributed to the campaign. But that year Somoza ordered the dissolution of the Patriotic Literacy Campaign's National Committee. On December 23, 1972, the headquarters of La Prensa was destroyed in the massive earthquake that leveled most of Managua. Chamorro rebuilt the newspaper's offices on the North Highway, and it reopened in March 1973. During the next years, resistance rose against Somoza in numerous quarters of Nicaragua. La Prensa continued to be a voice of opposition even a